Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm going to give the audience about one more minute to go ahead and join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So please hang tight. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Kevin Hancock. I'm Director of Sales Engineering here at Exostar. And thanks for attending today's webinar, Tackling NIST 800-171 and CMMC Documentation. Before we get started, just want to cover a few housekeeping items. So today's webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. It'll include a Q&A session as part of that. A large portion of today's webinar is answering those questions that were submitted from the audience prior to the webinar today. If we do have an outage of some reason, just go ahead and wait a minute and then go ahead and refresh that page and you should get back connected. For your convenience, there is a link in the YouTube description to a glossary of commonly used terms, acronyms, and initializations. We're going to be talking about government regulations today and the policies and procedures that wrap around those. So there's quite a few of those as part of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded. It will be available on demand via the Exostar resource library. That's found at www.exostar.com/resources. That'll be available post-event as well. If you look at the YouTube link you received in your email, and if you click on that, you'll also be able to replay the webinar at any time as well. If after today's webinar, you'd like to speak with one of our industry experts or request a copy of this slide deck, please reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. If you go to our website, you'll see a live chat feature. You can also ask on there. And Exostar's website is located at www.exostar.com. The application we're going to talk about today is Policy Pro. There is a free trial for Policy Pro available. If you'd like to go ahead and start a trial and follow along with us, it takes about 2 minutes to go ahead and get started. But there is a link in the YouTube description to that sign-up procedure. So I encourage everyone to go there and sign up for a trial. So as I mentioned, my name's Kevin Hancock. I'm Director of Sales Engineering here at Exostar. I'm joined today by Sean Fornwalt of ISMS Solutions. Sean serves as the Director of Client Technical Support at ISMS Solutions and ISMS Applications. He's a member of the Policy Pro development and quality assurance teams, and he'll be the one driving the majority of the webinar today. Oops, Sean?
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. We are going to jump in and take a look at the Policy Pro platform. Now, the best way that we can start is by going to platform.ismsapplications.com. And if you've signed up for that free trial, it will direct you there from that email, and you'll be able to log in. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to hit sign in. Now, if this is your first time coming through, you will have a registration process to go through, and this is where we collect some basic information about the organization and the individual who's signing up so that we can reach out if there's an issue or, we can make sure that everything's working properly. Plus, the name of the organization is going to come in very handy when we look at our templates. But after we do the registration process and we've set everything up, we need to make a decision, right? We're going to come to a decision point where we have to pick which standard are we working on during this session. Now, it's not a binding choice. We can change it once we're into the platform, but we want to make sure that we know what we're working on because there is some minor differences in the two standards. So we're going to start in the 171 because that is the current requirement for DoD contractors. And the good part about this is that from what's coming out on the CMMC 2.0, it's looking like a mirror image of the 171 with a couple extra steps at the end, depending upon what level you're at, or at least the level 2 is a mirror, one for one almost from the NIST to the CMMC. But once we've gone ahead and selected what standard we want to work with here, we're going to come to our dashboard. The dashboard is just a place where you're able to get some high-level information about federal contracting, as well as seeing your scores from all the documents that you've assessed through our scoring algorithms. But what we have here, again, very top of the page, some basic information. It explains what the platform is able to do and how it works and what we can get out of it as a user. The next part we have is our questions that we ask every new user of the platform, and that is, do you not have policies and you need assistance creating them, or do you have some policies together and you just like to see where they're at before you jump into writing all new policies or editing the ones you have? The next part down is our Bloomberg government analysis. What this does is we have different articles coming in on a regular basis from the Bloomberg government organization, where it's all about federal contracting. We have the most recent ones here on the dashboard. We can also go on the left-hand nav and click on analysis, and this is going to take us to the full library of Bloomberg government articles. Now, the way that we've worked this out with Bloomberg Government is that we host the articles on the platform, so you don't have to worry about going through a paywall or hitting a login screen. You can just go in and read the articles that interest you. You can sort them by industry. So if you're looking at IT and, IT services, you can select that and it will order them in that particular industry. And again, these are just articles that are there to help you keep up to date on what's going on in federal contracting, as it comes out and as it becomes available. But let's go back to the dashboard now, and we're going to take a quick look at our document relevance dashboard, which if this is your first time through, you won't see this because it only shows up once we have actually clicked or we have scored a document, right? So once the document has been scored, we'll see that score and all the different metrics we have right here on the dashboard. We can also export this out into a PDF or Excel format, and that helps, with sharing a progress report with your supervisor or your boss. And it just helps with creating an audit trail of what you have been or how your documentation has been progressing over time. So with the dashboard and these two questions, we do run into a fork in the road. We have to decide, are we satisfied with the policies we had? We just want to get some advice on them, or do we need to start with templates and build them out ourselves? So we're going to go under the assumption that we don't have any policy documentation at the moment. So we're going to jump into our policy builder. Now, right on the left-hand side here, we do have the Policy Builder link, and this will bring us into the Policy Builder itself. We can click on the policy family. We can select which of the 14 different policy families under the 171 we want to work with. And for today's demonstration, we're going to focus on access control because that's the free template that comes with the 2-week trial. You don't have to pay anything for it. You're able to export it out, and it does cover almost 20% of the total controls of the 171. So we're going to go to access control, and it's going to give us 3 different things that we need to do before we even see the template. Before we see any kind of language, it's going to have us go through these 3 steps. The prepare step, we're just getting some basic information about what this particular policy family is covering, as well as where you may find some of the information throughout your organization. Our gather is a much more focused list. Now, it's not a complete list, so you may have other documents that are helpful in this process, but we're giving you some idea as to what type of documentation you're going to want to bring together in order to help you through creating your cybersecurity policies. And then because we understand that this is not just an IT problem, it's a whole business problem, we want to make sure that you're getting in touch with certain individuals within your organization as well as external to it. And we want these people to be able to answer questions for us, right? Like, where do we store stuff? What operating system are we running on? What's what's the most current update of this software that we're using? Those things may not be available internally or readily available internally, and you may have to reach out to an integrator or a third-party contractor that set that up for you. But once we have a pretty good idea of what we're going to be doing, what documents we need to bring together, and who we're going to go to for advice, we're going to go ahead and hit the Get Started button and jump right into the policy template. So once we've gone ahead and clicked on the Get Started, we're now in the Policy Builder proper, where all the language for the template resides. The way that we've set this up is that we've broken it down into individual constituent parts, so you're not having to do, in this case, 22 controls all at once. We can focus purely on one control at a time, include everything that we need to have in there, and then we can move to the next one once we're ready. So instead of it being a daunting task, it's broken down into more manageable pieces. But once we're looking at this, we can look up at the top here and we know where we're at because it's telling us it's 3.1, and then we have the organization name. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said that part of that organization name from registration comes into play in the policy builder. So what this is going to do is intersperse your organization name where it would be appropriate throughout the entire template documentation. So as we can see in the purpose up here, we have ISMS solutions where it's necessary, and this is done automatically by the software itself. Now, it's not editable from the user side, but if you need to change it because it was misspelled or the company was acquired or merged into another firm, whatever the case, give our folks at our support center in West Virginia a call, an email, or you can even use the on-platform chat, and we can get that rectified for you pretty quickly, during business hours. Obviously, if it's 2 o'clock in the morning on the eastern coast of the US, my wife might be a little mad, but I could probably take care of it for you anyway. But we are here to help. We have live agents that are ready to answer any calls, answer any questions, and deal with any issues that you might experience using Policy Pro. But the next couple of things we have are just some housekeeping items where we're saying what department is responsible for this particular policy, what's our issue date or our effective date, so saying that from this date forward, this is the company policy, as well as the individual or department that is responsible for the approval of this document. And then we have a versioning number, which we call our tracking number. You can put in anything here you want. You can do versioning, you could do, all sorts of special characters, whatever makes sense to you and your organization, you can put that there if you like. Now, the first thing that any policy for anything really needs to establish is a purpose, or why are we writing this particular policy? And unfortunately, it's just saying that the DoD told me I had to isn't always the best purpose. So what we've done with Policy Pro is we provided some language that you can adopt if you like, and it applies to your organization. You can modify it however you need to so that it does apply to your organization and explains why the company is undertaking this particular process to create policy around their cybersecurity. Now, if we want to edit this information, all we do is we click on this little black circle with the white pencil icon in it, and this will open up our text editor box. We can go ahead, we can select all. Now we are going to just cut this down a little bit. Well, actually we'll bold it so that it's easier to see for everyone. And then we're going to hit save. Now, if I click outside of it, it's not going to let me leave until I hit save. Now, the purpose and the scope, you will see the change to the text right on the platform. You won't see it, however, for the controls underneath it. But as we can see, it bolded everything. It's very simple to use. And now we're going to jump down to the scope. We've established why, and now we're going to establish what is being covered and who is required to adhere to this policy. And that's what our scope statement is going to do. We're going to say all the IT assets of the organization, and then we're going to say all users, all employees, contractors, vendors, third-party contractors, whoever it may be. If they're using our system and our IT assets, they have to follow this policy. So again, same thing. We just go ahead and click our edit button and it will pop up in the text editor. And now because we haven't done anything, we're able to just close it out and move forward. So after we've determined the why, the what, and the who, we need to go down and start dealing with each of the controls one at a time. Now, on the current NIST platform, we do group together related controls. That way you can move back and forth without having to open up multiple windows on your desktop. But again, we have, the grouping is any documents detailing the limiting of system access. So, having authorized users and determining access rights, very important for this. So what we can do now is we have our guidelines. These will, high level information about what this particular control is covering and what should be included in that particular control. Same thing to edit. We have our black circle with the white pencil icon in it. And now we also have our reset functionality. This is just a circular arrow icon right next to edit. And what this will allow me to do is I'm able to go in and reset to template language from any changes that I have made. So this is typically used when, you've written a policy, you've exported it, you've scored it, and it didn't really make sense when you went to implement it. So you just want to kind of start over from the template and you want to start fresh. It's not something you have to do, but we have the ability to do it. We just hit yes, and it will go ahead and revert all of that language back to the template language. The other thing that will show up as well is we have this timestamp right here. So anyone on our account is able to see this timestamp, and it will allow you to know when this part of the policy was last edited and by whom. So again, we just show the most recent, but our logs that we keep internally do show every action taken. So if we have to investigate something, we can, but we're giving you the last edit to this particular group. So that's why it doesn't look the way it was the last time I was here, because, Jim came in and changed it. But we're going to go ahead and open up the text editor. And again, same thing that we had for the purpose and scope. We're going to go through the language. We're going to change what we don't have. So if we don't have a configuration control board, okay, that's not a big deal. We don't have it, but now we have to have somebody else or another group to approve the account creation process. And in this particular case, it's about, you know, are we going to set up an account or not? Are all the values there? Or did they pass the appropriate background checks? Do they have the appropriate clearance? So what I'm going to change it to is an IT administrator. We'll just say IT admin for now, and then we can go ahead and make our own abbreviation for it, and we're good to go. So that's how simple it is to change the template to better reflect your organization, because that's where you need to start from, right? You don't need to worry so much about doing a full gap assessment and doing a risk assessment and finding every single problem that you have, because it's sometimes easier to find the issues as you're going through your documentation and you're going through the requirements in the 171A or from the documentation for 2.0 about what is required of every DoD contractor under this standard. So again, we go through, we make the changes and updates that we need to, and we're going to go ahead and click Save. Again, this timestamp was updated. It does run off of Greenwich Mean Time because we do have folks all around the world that are using our software, and this was the best way to have a constant time value. So again, if we come in here, you just make the conversion from GMT, and you can go back and figure out what the time was. Now, for our more eagle-eyed viewers and folks who have been in the platform or been to a previous webinar may notice that our export button looks a little different. This is part of our continuing updating and optimization of the software itself. And as part of our last update, a couple of things visually change so that they're easier for the user to understand and to interpret. Before, it was a little black box with an upward arrow in it. Some folks were telling us that looks like an upload button. So as we were making updates to the policy builder, we made the changes for our users to make it simpler for them to use. But what we're going to do now is that we've made the change in our text editor. We are happy with what we have. So we're going to go ahead and click export, and it's going to, right? It's going to root of policy. I do have. So now we have our upload queue. We're going to go to attach document. We're going to select the document that we want to work with, and we'll hit open. So we see it right here. This is the document we're about to assess. If we don't want to do that, we click declare selected, or if we have other supporting documentation, we can upload multiple documents together, and the system will aggregate them together and score it as though it was a singular document. But because we're looking at our access control policy, we're going to go ahead and hit submit. Now, we have to wait for the algorithms and everything to score, and it doesn't take very long at all. It takes a couple of seconds, and it runs through, and it's going to tell us how we did according to the relevance of our document to the standard. So when we look at the score and see a 69.9 or a 70%, roughly, this isn't a C average document. This means that we have 70% relevance from our documentation to that part of the standard. Anything above 50% relevance means that you are covering a majority of the key concepts that need to be covered by a policy of this type. And what we're going to do now is go and take a nice quick look at how the scoring works and how we can use that scoring to help build out our policies to be better. First thing we're seeing is relevance, right? Our score is above a 50%. The document appears to adequately cover a majority of the items that it should be covering. It's not saying it's covering everything, but it's saying a majority of them appear to be covered. Our model similarity and word count aren't going to affect the score so much, but they're there as a check. If you've used one of our templates and you've made minimal customization to it, you maybe only changed a couple things, it will tell you this is too similar to the template, you need to customize it more. It's not a very high threshold that you have to pass, but if you're using one of our templates and it's too close to that template, we're going to tell you that. It doesn't affect the score. It's not going to change things, but it's telling you you probably want to go back in and customize this a little bit more. And then our word count works on a similar, idea. It's saying this document does not appear to be long enough to cover everything that it should be covering. Now, all the templates are going to be adequately long enough as they sit, but if you can't cover access control in 500 words. So if your document is too short, it's going to tell you that. And one of the easiest ways I've seen for that to happen is if, you accidentally upload your awareness and training, which has 3 controls in it, into your access control, which has 22. So it's expecting to have the length of a document that has 22 controls in it, and you're giving it 3. It's going to say, this looks like it's too short. And then you can go, oh, I made a mistake. I put it in the wrong thing. And with the subscription, you can upload as many documents as you want to score them. You can export as many templates out from the policy builder as you want. But our trial does have a limitation on that. You can upload a couple of documents and you can only export access control, but that's enough to get you started, right? And if it works and it helps you through the process, you can come back and say, I want the rest. And we can, we have sales folks that can work with you to make sure that you're getting what you need for your policy writing journey. But one of the most important things that I do want to point out on our score here is what's called our detailed scorecard, right? So we have all this information. It seems to be covering most of what it has to. It appears to be long enough. It's not, similar to the template, but how do I really know what I might have missed? So if we click on our detailed scorecard link, it's going to tell us all the information we already know about the document itself, and then we're going to have what we call our Kenny, or our key elements not included. So we have two different types of Kenies. We have our general policy Kenies, which are more recommendations. These are different key concepts that are typically found in a document of this type, but aren't directly tied to the access control policy family. Now, again, detection of unsanctioned information, that could be under audit and accountability. That could be under, incident response. It could be under many other sections of the overall 171, but it's not directly mapped in the 3.1 section of the 171. Now, on the other hand, we have our control-specific Kenies. Now, these are tied directly to individual controls within the standard itself. So if we're looking at this first one, CUI and non-public information, and it's telling me it's in 3.1.22. So now I know precisely where in my document I need to go to see that particular, to find that concept, or how I may not have covered it properly. So what we're going to do is we are going to come here, and let me just export out that document real quick again, so I don't have to go digging through my files. So we have the same document here. We'll zoom in just a little bit so everyone can see this. And we have all that housekeeping up here at the top. We have, 3.1, we're saying what we're doing. We have our purpose, we have our scope, and now we start right in to the first control. Now, the way that we've structured our templates is that we've put everything for one individual control right up front. Everything for 3.1.1, everything about creating authorized users, about storing their data, everything like that is going to be found here. And this does two things for us. One, it allows us to use the Kenny, because I know that the first one came from the 0.22, I can do a control or command F to find and do 0.22. And I go directly to that part of my policy that I need to go and examine. So if we look here, we're going to see that, control information posted on publicly accessible systems. That's precisely what the detailed scorecard was showing us. So if we go back here, close, we'll go back here, and we'll just scroll down. Well, we use this one because it's the same. So we have CUI non-public information. It tells us where in the document it should have been found, and then gives us a little bit of background information on what should have been covered by this particular control. And if we look here, we can see that, this requirement addresses any system that is publicly accessible and the data that is stored on that particular system. Now, this means that they can come on to anyone can come onto it. They don't need a credential. They don't need, any kind of multi-factor or any kind of authentication. And this is like, your company Facebook, your company website, anywhere that is readily available to the public. The rules or of the standard is saying we don't want to put CUI on these systems. So what we do is we go ahead and are going to identify or designate individuals to do this. But there's another trick that we can use on Policy Pro. So if we go ahead and take a look on the left-hand nav, we have our reference library. I can go here, I can choose access control, has a bunch of good documentation about access control and all the different technologies and processes that you're going to be using. So I can read up on it, educate myself to what I need to know to do this part. I can finish it and then move on to the next. But the trick I want to point out here is that if you come up here to the NIST standards documents, there's this document called the 800-171A. And this is for assessing your adherence to the requirements of 171. So you can see that we've gone to the NIST.gov site. We're outside of the Policy Pro platform. We'll zoom in just a little bit here. We're going to go on the left here, select our table of contents. And now, because I know that the 0.22 is at the end of access control, we're going to click on awareness and training, and we're going to scroll up the page. So now I have the 0.22, and I know precisely what the 5 requirements that my documentation and implementation are going to be tested against. So now I can go and address each one of these individually, and if I contain everything and I'm using the best practices, I'm documenting it properly, and it's been implemented properly, I've met the requirement, and I know that when the auditor or assessor comes and takes a look at it, that I've addressed the individual requirement of each part of this. So we have this documentation available to us from the 171. It was put out roughly at the same time. And if we go to the CMMC website on the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, under the documentation tab, they do have the level 1 and level 2 assessment guides. They're very similar to the 171A because that's where they came from. So we know precisely what the requirements are. We can look at our documentation and figure it out. So the first one we have here is individuals authorized are identified, right? The people who can post on these systems are identified. So if we look at our policy, we're saying that the organization designates individuals to post on publicly accessible systems. One down. Now, if we go back, we can see the next one, procedures to ensure that it's not posted are identified and that there's a review process prior to and after posting, and then a mechanism to remove. So if we go ahead and look here, and I'm just going to remove a little bit of garbage text that got from another demonstration. There we go. We'll just fix that. So we have designation of the individuals authorized. We train those folks so that they know how to identify CUI versus normal information. Now, we also want to consider PII, but that's not the direct focus of the 171. And then we have, proposed content is reviewed prior to and after it's been posted, as well as having a removal mechanism. So we've hit the 5 requirements. As long as we're doing things to the industry best practice, we should be good to go and say that yes, our documentation and its implementation are following the requirements that they have to meet. So that's just a very high level overview of the different tools that are available on the Policy Pro platform. We also have on the NIST side, we have an Ask the Auditor section. We're able to go and we sat down with a gentleman who's been doing security, regulations and adherence for the last 30 plus years and said, Dr. Phil, how do I prepare to conduct an audit? Or how do you prepare as an auditor to conduct an audit? And he goes through that in a 4 to 5 minute video over several different topics. What documents do I need? What personnel should be present? Do I need to call my attorney? What is the CUI program at all? And what happens when I don't comply? All of these are there. Trialers can get them. Anyone who's subscribed can get them. And as we get more information, we'll be expanding these, sections of the platform to give you the best information to make the decision for your organization. Now, the one last thing that I do want to point out before I turn it back over to Kevin for the Q&A is that if we look in the lower left, we have the support information. It's kind of hidden, but this has a lot of good information if I'm hitting a roadblock. So I'm going to open this up. It's going to tell me the recommended versions of the browsers that I should be using. And then it's also going to give me the agreement and the accounts, right? So if we look at this and we click on the agreement, it comes up. It's the EULA, your user agreement that you agreed to when you signed in, but it's always available because sometimes it does get updated as things change. The other thing that we have here as well is our account section. So if we go in here, we can see all the different users that I've set up as users on my account, and I can control who has access from my organization. So if we go ahead and hit add, all I need is a first name, a last name, and an email. You make them the admin if they're going to be, managing the different users on your account. Otherwise, you just leave it unchecked and it creates a normal user. But we can only have a total of 4, right? So we have 4 active users. It will not allow me to create any more users. I can't enable any other users, but I can always use the disable button. I can click them off. That person no longer has access and I can enable someone else. The other thing that I want to stress on this is that if you need more slots for users because your organization is larger, you have multiple facilities, whatever the case, call us, let us know, and you can reach out to us through the email that we have here for Policy Pro, or you can give us a call between 9 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard because we have live folks waiting to take your call in our West Virginia call center. We can add in additional slots if that's necessary because we're gauging everything off of the user activity. So if we have a number of people that need more slots, we could just up that by default. But we're always taking information from our users, what they like, what they don't like, and making the modifications necessary to give you a tool that can truly help you get through what seems like a daunting process. But with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin, and we're going to go through the Q&A that was submitted earlier through the invitation.
Thanks, Sean. Let me back control. Oh. So while I queue up the questions here, just want to remind everyone there is an exit poll. You'll see the link in the YouTube description. We would appreciate it if you did fill out the exit poll. Your feedback from that, your suggestions for additional topics, et cetera, help us drive our series of webinars, and we'd love to get your feedback. So as Sean said, we're going to go ahead and kick off the Q&A session now. So let me start with, we have kind of a broad question, Sean, about, so it says, what kind of firewall, email, internet, two-factor authentication, login password, network segregation, et cetera, is needed to meet the NIST 800-171 requirements?
So my initial answer to that is the best you can afford.
There you go. It's a wide question. Yep.
Because, and the reason is, right, we were going over the requirements for each individual control.
Mm-hmm.
So every DoD contractor has the same requirements that they have to meet, right? The 171 spells that out. CMMC 2.0 spells that out. How they meet that requirement is not spelled out. Any way that you can meet those requirements. Now, the other document that I would recommend, I believe it's the 870, which is on the reference library on Policy Pro, is a list of approved. Now, it's under the 53, so it's for federated agencies or federal agencies. Now, a federated agency is any private organization acting on behalf of a federal government agency, right? So if you're doing notary, you're doing whatever, you have to follow the 53. And that the 870 is there to support that, and it's a approved list of technology that's allowed to be used in federal agencies or federated agencies. And you can use that as kind of a guide to say, maybe I don't want to invest in Huawei because they're owned by, a company outside of the US, or maybe I shouldn't go with Kaspersky because again, it's created outside of the US and that can cause issues because there's been, cases where free antivirus software packages are reporting back to the government what you're actually doing while you're using their software. So there is some guidance in that, but it's a little bit above what 171 requires. So it's really going to come down to what you can afford to keep running at all times. And you need to hit the best practices and the requirements of the standard itself.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let's see. So you mentioned obviously CUI a few times in the presentation there. We got like 3 questions that kind of boil down to how do we well there's two things. Who's got the responsibility to mark CUI as CUI, and how do we determine it?
Right. So CUI or CUI should be identified at its origination point, right?
Right.
So if it's coming from the DoD, it should be labeled from there. But as those contracts and those schematics and technical drawings get broken up to go to subcontractors, that can change a little bit, right? They're taking one section out, so they're creating a new document, and it doesn't get marked. It's up to whoever is extracting it to mark it as CUI. The other thing is that if your organization creates CUI during the process of, whatever you're doing for your contract, that should be labeled as well. But it all comes back to that origination point.
Right.
That, but if you find that, hey, this isn't marked and it contains CUI, you should mark it, right?
Yep.
Because the worst they're going to do is say, no, that really isn't, and they're going to remove the marking. But if it's not marked, it may not go in the right part of your server, and it could be unintentionally disclosed because somebody made a social media post. So if it looks like CUI and it smells like CUI, mark it if it's not.
That's right. Better be safe than sorry in these
Right.
cases. Yeah. Right. Let's see here. Let me just. So as we, Sean did a great job of presenting Policy Pro today. Exostar has another solution, Certification Assistant, which really helps walk you through that process of the actual 800-171 or CMMC assessment itself. So it takes those policies that you create in Policy Pro, allows you to, if you will, mark your compliance with those against the CMMC requirements. It generates those things you need to be, to meet the majority of the DFARS requirements. It generates that SSP, that system security plan. It generates any POAMs you have because you have some open requirements that you haven't quite figured out how to do yet, or you're in the middle of implementing them, etc. Much like Policy Pro that you saw today, CA also has a free trial. So if you're, it is, if you will, another place to help you get started. Policy Pro, as Sean showed you today, helps you get those policies written and then obviously, implemented within your framework. Certification Assistant allows you to basically to check off that you're doing them all, that you've got that you've got all those controls taken care of, if you will, and marks your completion of those.
Right. And the other thing, Kevin, just real quick with CA, is that it's an excellent task manager.
Yes. Yes, because as you identify those POAMs, it allows you to say, okay, hey, Sean, we're going to assign you this. It's due by this date. Let's me or somebody else in the organization track our completion of those POAMs, because all of these things are tied together, if you will, right? It's, okay, here's the policy that governs this control. Here's my implementation of that control. Here's me checking that. And if I've got to still fulfill that, this is how I'm going to close that control off. So let's answer a few more questions. So let's see. We've got so we get this question, I think, on every webinar, but it's when is CMMC going to be in full effect?
Probably, if we go by the original time frame from beginning of November, which was 9 to 24 months,
Yep.
probably 6 to 18, maybe.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we should be waiting to see that it comes through, because here's the kicker. It's all 171 with extra steps. So we should be doing it anyway.
Exactly. Well, not one, but one of the clarifying points that came out in November when they announced CMMC2 is that they said, look, it is going to be tied to 800-171. They'll work with NIST to put in additional controls if necessary, but it's all going to, if you will, flow through the same type of procedure. So the best way, at least, in my opinion today, to make sure you're on track for CMMC is to is to satisfy NIST 800-171, and go through those steps. The other thing I will say is if you've got contracts today that have DFARS clauses, that sorry, I hit my keyboard by mistake. That you got, and you have DFARS clauses 7012, 7019, 7020. Those require you to do the NIST 800-171 assessment. They require you to go and report your SPUR score. So that's, if you will, how you're doing against those controls. So those are contractual obligations you may have today. So I would also encourage everyone to go ahead and check their contracts to make sure they're complying with all those things. Let's see. So, well, number 4 should be pretty straightforward, Sean. It says, are there any procedure templates out there?
There may be, but the problem with procedural templates is they're very nuanced.
Yep.
Because you might be running a different operating system, you might have different hardware, so you have to do things in a different order. We have to remember that the policies are guidelines, right? We're just saying this is what we're doing as an organization. And then we need to create processes in order to adhere to that. And then the procedures are that step-by-step instruction of what you do to complete a given process. So if we focus on writing what we're currently doing, it will give you insight into what a procedure will look like. And I mean, get granular, get really detailed. Like you click on this, you select this box, and then you click on this thing. Whatever that procedure to complete a process is, that's how you start creating your procedures, because the way that you do it at your organization could be very different from how we do it at my organization. And I can almost guarantee it is.
Right.
Because again, we have the same requirements. How we get there is where we become unique, because we have to do it within our cost projection. We have to do it within our expertise. So the way that we make procedures is going to be very, very different from another organization. So that's one of the reasons we don't really see procedure templates, because of that granularity and nuance that's required in them.
Right. That kind of leads us to this next question we got in, and another question that we often get is about, look, the defense industrial base is a large market, and it encompasses large, small, and everything in between businesses. So we often get this question about, well, I'm a small shop. I've got somewhere between 1 and 10 people. Are there different requirements that I have to meet?
Short answer is no. But I go back to my previous point. You have the same requirements. How you get there is up to you. And as long as you can prove that your process works, it's going to be, if you can make it work, you make it work. And as long as you're hitting the requirements. But one of the things I find with smaller firms, right, that it's not a question of doing things, right? It's a question of documenting and not knowing what I should document, how I should document it, which is where CA is stellar. Because all you do is, if you're, creating a list for, what is it? It's 3.1.1 requirements C, right? You have to identify all devices used by authorized users on your network.
Yep.
Part of CA, you have a device registry where you're putting in, IP address, MAC address, serial number, model number, all that information for each individual device. And then you hit export and you have a full list of all your devices.
Right. And that's, and to me, that is, if you will, that part of this, the size of the business matters, because at the end of the day, these are based on a system security plan. So the boundaries of that system are what you want to define. And with the smaller business, that boundary may be very small, right? A couple computers, some kind of storage, etc. So it may be very well a mix of physical and digital assets and things like that. So it's kind of that boundary that you can put around that box.
Right. And a lot of cloud services, they have to be FedRAMP certified, they have to be ITAR certified. So use the appropriate cloud service for what
Yep.
you're doing, right?
Right.
If you're doing DoD work, don't put it on an Amazon commercial cloud.
Absolutely. And that, well,
Yeah,
and
you go to
actually
the
that,
Gov Cloud and you
yep,
put it up there.
right. And that really, if you will, we got a question about that, right? It was about, can you talk about policies and procedures around cloud-based storage?
Yeah, I mean, it's to be blunt about it, you don't have any control over that environment. You may be able to set a couple configurations, but you don't own that system, you don't operate that system, and you don't maintain it. So you have to go, is the company that's providing the service certified for what I'm doing?
Yep.
If they're not, you shouldn't be doing that there. You should look for another provider.
Right.
AWS GovCloud is what Policy Pro sits on. We don't
Right.
have any CUI on the platform, but because we're security conscious, we pay that extra amount to be on the GovCloud. We went through that process to be approved to be on the GovCloud. So, I mean, this really comes down to wanting to protect your company from attack.
Right.
Whether you're a small firm, whether you're a large firm, we want to protect our business, the money, the money flow that's coming through, the contracts that are coming through, but we also need to protect our people too. So not only is this a requirement that we have to do as a DoD contractor, we should be doing it anyway because we're operating in a cyber theater. And if we're not having these basic protections in place, we're doing it without any body armor.
Right.
And that is never a good thing.
Absolutely. Okay. So I think that we've answered most of the questions there. So I'm going to go ahead and just remind everyone to go ahead and take our exit poll. Again, it's there in the YouTube description. Would really appreciate it if people went ahead and filled that out. And just want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you do have some additional questions, you can email us. As I mentioned before, you can go to the exostar.com website. There's a chat link there. You can ask one of our experts there, request today's presentation, etc. So once again, Sean, thanks to you so much for your time today. And everyone, thank you for
Absolutely.
joining us.
And real quick, I'm going to do a shameless plug.
No
Every
problem.
Tuesday and Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, we hold our Policy Building 101. You can find it on the Exostar events page. You can sign up. We're going over threat identification this week.
Oh,
Next week, we'll have a different topic where we're covering, real basic stuff. If you know what you're doing, it's not for you. But if you've never done this or you're confused about what you have to do, it's a really good resource where you can ask questions. You can actually interrupt me while I go through it and ask a question directly. So that is another resource that's available. It's a more interactive resource, but it's definitely worth checking out.
great. Thanks so much, Sean. Everyone have a great day.